class. For this section, we're going to be talking about the biopsychosocial explanation of OCD. So first, we're going to start with biology. So the biological perspective really looks at what is going on with the body, and especially with the brain in the case of OCD. And so we have a couple of lines of research that have really looked at what are the different types of neurotransmitters involved. And serotonin being the one that we've kind of pinpointed and said, yeah, we think that this one is definitely involved, as well as parts of the brain, so the orbital frontal cortex and the caudate nucleus. So some of the things we found is that we see a increased activation in these two areas, and we'll get into a little bit about what they are. So I actually thought it would be great to have an expert in OCD tell you a little bit more about the brain in OCD and how, and we'll then connect it back to these orbital frontal cortex and the caudate nucleus.
So separate with OCD, if you have this, you're trying to be 100% certain in a particular area, and there's a reason for that. There's a part of the brain that actually responds to uncertainty. Now, everybody doesn't like uncertainty, and evolutionarily speaking, this makes perfect sense. You know, primitive man's in the jungle, hears a noise, it's good if he checks to see what it is. Another thing that everybody's brain does is that when we complete something, we get a feeling of satisfaction. Again, you don't build all this, have all this technological stuff if people didn't want to complete things. When you have OCD and it's biologically active, the threshold for those is less, meaning it takes less uncertainty for you to feel more anxious, and you don't get the completion feeling when you do something, which drives you absolutely crazy. That's why you're able to wash your hands over and over and you know they're clean, but you don't know they're clean. Because logically, you actually know they're clean, but in an emotional way, you're not getting the feeling. And this is the major problem with OCD, trying to be 100% certain. Now, you know that if you have OCD, you're not concerned about every uncertainty. You know, again, if I ask you if your spouse is alive, if that's not your form of OCD, you say yes, and you feel perfectly comfortable. So what happens is sometime in your history, you have a particular problem. It either hits suddenly or gradually. Like you see something really disgusting and you feel like you need to wash your hands, or you're just sitting and watching a movie and somebody gets killed and like, you know, I don't want to kill somebody, or how do I know I don't want to kill somebody? And you do what everyone else does. You know, everybody has sometimes rechecked the clock to see if it's, you know, if the alarm is on. Everybody has maybe seen something really disgusting, and if they're in a location to wash their hands, they've washed their hands. And if you don't have OCD, perfectly fine. But if you have OCD, if it's biologically active at that moment, now you're in trouble, because you're trying to become certain, and that is the part of the brain that is not working. Literally, there's a place where the signal goes, and normally it's let out, and it gets sent back to be reprocessed, and you experience this as uncertainty. So OCD has two components, a learned component and this biological component. The biological component is just what I described. It is that simple. But the thing is that taking meds is really useful, but it doesn't touch learning. So meds alone, 25 to 50% of the symptoms might be gone. And for many people, that's better than nothing, but it doesn't really get rid of the problem. So we do this other process where we're going to help people learn to confront their problems and live with the uncertainty of what's happening.
What I really liked about that video from Dr. Grayson was all about how important it is that, you know, we do have these kind of loops in our brain, and that it's kind of the signaling gone awry. But the other thing is that he emphasizes the importance of learning. So you have both of those things which are involved in OCD. But getting back into the actual biology of OCD, what we see is certain structures in the brain, one of which is called the orbital frontal cortex. Get my little laser pointer in here. Which is kind of sitting, you know, behind your eyes, right? So the orbital is the eyes, frontal cortex, and that's kind of where we start to make decisions. Some of those decisions are about things that are wrong. So we can kind of call this kind of the worry, where we start to worry. So you might say, oh, did I lock my door when I left? And that worry loop starts to go into effect. So the orbital frontal cortex says, I'm worried about this. And it sends that signal back to the thalamus. And if you remember biopsych, thalamus is our relay station. So it's directing signals all over the place so that we can act on that worry. Most of the time, we can have kind of, or some of the time, the caudate nucleus, which is part of the basal ganglia, it gives us some breaks. So we might go into that worry mode, right? So if things are functioning properly, we start to worry, and we have to make a decision. Okay, do I have to, go back home and make sure that my door is locked? Your thalamus kind of relays that everywhere. Your caudate nucleus says, maybe not. It's okay. I remember us locking the door. And your orbital frontal cortex kind of says, okay, that's fine. So basically it's this loop. And what happens is the caudate nucleus kind of tamps down some of that, the worry loop. But in individuals with OCD, this may not actually work. It may not do that inhibition. So it may not put on the brakes. And so you kind of get stuck in this loop over and over again of obsessing over that worry. So you may be fearful of something, oh, I didn't check it, and then also might be unsure, right? That uncertainty that is there might make it so that you continue to worry and obsess over it. So what they find is that the orbital frontal cortex might be overactive, and same with the caudate nucleus. And so the caudate nucleus is not putting on the brakes, and so you get stuck in this loop of obsessions. There are a couple of therapies. One of the things that might be going on here, is that there may be less serotonin activity in this loop, which means that it's overactive. So what they find is that we can do therapies. So some therapies are serotonin-based antidepressants, so SSRIs, and they can be helpful in individuals with OCD. So as that doctor that I can't remember his name, as he was saying, you do see some relief with medications, but it's not going to bring all the relief because this is in part a learned disorder as well. So we'll get into that in the next perspective. And this is where you also see relapse will occur if medication is stopped. So this is something that we should note. And what we see is that a combination therapy, so medication and CBT, may be the most effective. So while SSRIs are some of the best medications, sometimes that there are treatment-resistant OCD candidates. So basically people that have tried traditional treatments and they still didn't get better. All of these are experimental therapies, but I want to put them here just to kind of give you an idea that they are developing some new therapies in different ways. So there's something called deep brain stimulation, where you can actually stimulate parts of the brain by sticking an electrode into the brain. So they do this, for example, where they might stimulate the caudate nucleus, for example, to really help manage the symptoms of OCD. There's also something called transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is basically you put a big magnet over your head, and it's a specific type of magnet, and they basically put these magnetic pulses into your brain. I've heard that it doesn't hurt at all to actually get this done, and this is also something that has been looked at with depression as well. So again, they're all experimental, so if you're interested in this, we're talking about research studies. Same thing with brain surgery by actually taking out different parts of the brain. I think it is, I don't know which part of the brain it is, just a second. So according to the International OCD Foundation, which is where I'm getting this information from, they are saying that you actually burn an area in the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. And about 50% of people who did not respond to any type of therapy actually got some benefit from the procedure. So it's kind of an interesting thing that they're starting to figure out a little bit more about what areas might be implicated and how best to treat it.